All right, if you would take out your message outline for today. All of us want to make a difference with our life. That's one of the things that God... Oh, I forgot to say. Mindy and I were out of town last week at a wedding back in Nashville. And we didn't get to give you all the good news that we finished, as a church, we finished in the black again. So that was... I don't know how many years in a row that is, but a bunch. I don't know, 20 or so, somewhere in that vicinity. So I think it happened. I mean, I was here. I think it happened on the last day of the year.
11 p.m.
11 p.m. on December 31st, which is not unusual. We are very, very thankful to you and without that, you know, our church doesn't really be able to function like we have, and the great pastoral staff that we have in our building and so many things. We do want to make a difference with our lives, and most of the time when we make a... Yeah?
How did we do on the light project?
The light project.
We hit 5,000 out of the 8 we were going for.
Okay, so we're close.
Actually, 6,000 out of 8.
6,000 out of 8. Okay, so we're close. All right. Making a difference with our lives. The way that our lives mostly make a difference is in really small ways. It looks almost infinitesimal. And because it looks so infinitesimal, it's easy for us to sort of draw the conclusion that my life really doesn't make that much of a difference. That's a very easy conclusion to draw. Our theme for the year, which is in your handout on your message here, is Dream Big and Think Small. Most of the time when we make a difference, it's in very small things, and most of the time it's relationally. It's not in some big whoop-de-doo, some kind of big production. Sometimes that has to do with sharing your faith with people or witnessing to people, and yet sometimes we sort of get ourselves all just screwballed when it comes to witnessing. We get the cart before the horse, and then we become almost paralyzed. We really don't know what to do. Witnessing, I think, is much easier than we generally think of it. There was one particular trial that was going on, and there was a woman that was getting ready to get up. She was a psychologist, and she got up to testify. She walked through the little gate there, and everything about this woman just said, you don't want to mess with her. Her dress was impeccable. Her scarf was tied just the right way. She had a big, some kind of bauble on her lapel. Her hair was just right. Her makeup looked like it was professionally done. And she got up. She was a psychologist. And she got up and she was sworn in by the bailiff. And her voice was authoritative. And she went to sit down. And she just kind of looked around like she owned the place. And just kind of this look of scorn. And she took the chair there where she was supposed to sit. And she didn't want to sit in the chair as it was. She had to have the chair where she wanted it. And so she grabbed the back of that chair and she pulled it back a little bit to give her a little more leg room. And she sat down on the chair. What she didn't know is that the two back legs of the chair were right on the precipice of the back of the witness stand. The district attorney got up, young guy, and there was no love lost between the district attorney and this particular psychologist. And he walked over to her to begin questioning. He said, would you tell us your name? And she crossed her arms like this, and she just kind of glared at him like he was just some little punk just out of law school. And she started to lean back in her chair, and suddenly one of the legs propped off the back end of it, and she in the chair catapulted off of the witness stand back into a pile of recording equipment and some evidence from a previous trial. Now, it was the kind of thing that you just wanted to laugh your head off, but because of her persona, everybody was stunned silent. She got up. She rearranged her dress back to an immaculate way. She did her hair. She checked her scarf. She put the chair back where she wanted it. She sat down in the chair. She glared at the judge as if he had something to do with this fiasco. And then she glared at everybody else as if to say, don't you dare give me a smirk. The district attorney, could hardly contain himself from laughing, although he did contain himself, couldn't resist starting off with this. Well, ma'am, we could start with an easier question. Would you tell us your name? Yeah, maybe a little bit too tough. Being a witness. Another story I like from trial and witnessing is a story from the Old West when the railroad was being built across the Kansas Plain. And they were going through farmland and ranch land and stuff, and there was a farmer who had a prize cow, and his prize cow came up missing one day. And he was sure that the railroad that was coming through had either run over the cow, or more than likely the workers had killed the cow at night, butchered it, and had themselves a whole lot of steak dinner. And so he went to talk to the railroad, and they, of course, they denied doing it. And so he decided to bring a lawsuit. He sued the railroad. And on the day of the trial, they were going to have the trial in this little general store in a back room. And the young attorney with the impressive black suit came, and here was this old farmer. And before they went in to talk to the justice of the peace for the trial, the attorney went to him and said, old man, he said, let me give you a piece of advice. The railroad is willing to settle your suit and will pay you a check today, but they're only willing to pay for half of what you claim your prized cow is worth. But I would suggest to you that you take the railroad up on it. The old man thought about it for a little bit and looked at the impressive attorney in his black suit, city slicked hair. Then he said, well, okay. So the attorney was happy. He pulled out the checkbook, wrote a check, gave it to him, took out the release agreement, had the old farmer sign it. The old farmer signed it. He said, now, does this mean that the deal is done now that I've signed this? And the attorney was just gleeful. He said, yes, we've settled out of court. It's a matter, it's legally done. And then the attorney just couldn't help himself because he wanted to gloat. He said, old man, you need to know this. It's very likely I could not have won this case. I think I got one over on you because the engineer at the time your cow disappeared was asleep in the engine, and the fireman was asleep back in the caboose. I could not present one witness today for your case. I'm sure I would have lost. I woke up this morning thinking, how am I going to win this case? I just didn't think I could. The old farmer looked at him and he said, well, you know, Sonny, when I woke up this morning too, I wasn't sure I was going to win this case either, especially when my prize cow walked into our barn this morning. Let me talk to you about gaining a hearing with people, which is one of the things we usually omit when we think about making a difference with people. We get the cart before the horse, and I think when it comes to sharing our faith with people, there are two easy things I find myself starting to do without even thinking about it. One is I start to get into the mode of telling before I get in the mode of asking and listening. And there's just a natural resistance that everybody has, virtually, to somebody telling you something they don't know. And the second is, sometimes it's easy to want to share your faith so much that the person becomes a project instead of a person. And there's something that happens in that interaction between people where sometimes they sense that. And so there's also resistance there also. In Mark 16:15, Jesus said, preach the good news to everyone, everywhere. What we have to do to give to people is good news. The question is, how do people who don't normally think of the gospel as good news, what can we do to make it where it becomes good news to them? In your handout, before people want to hear good news, they want to see good news in you. They want to sense this from you. They want to sense that you're a happy customer, that you're glad you became a Christian, and that it makes a difference in your life. And we're going to look at that next week and how you can communicate that with your friends. The question I want you to think about today is, what do people sense from you? As you relate to folks who are outside of the faith, what do they sense from you as you relate to them? I'd like to look at four things that Paul did by his example as he talked with people. Number one is prayerful concern. In Colossians 4:4, he said, pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. He just didn't assume that he could just walk in and just sort of wing out the gospel with people and it was going to go well. he knew that he needed to pray for people and for God to soften people's hearts and to make them where they're hungry to want to hear truth. The second thing that strikes me is his conduct. When he started the church in Thessalonica, the city in Greece, he started from scratch. Didn't know anybody when he walked into town. But I love the first 12 verses of chapter 2 because it goes back and he reminds the people, this is what I was like and what I was trying to do when I came to you back when we started the church. Verse 9, surely you remember, brothers, our toil and hardship. We work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. Now what he's saying is, you'll remember that I had a job. He was a tent maker. And he worked all during the day and he worked at night as many hours so that he could pay his way, so that he was not dependent on these brand new Christians for his wages and for his little mission team that he had with him. They worked hard. He reminds them about his conduct, his work ethic. On the inside of your handout, the third thing he mentions is his character. Verse 10, you are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. Now, I don't think Paul was a Jesus freak as we think about it today. They wouldn't have looked at him as a holy roller or holier than thou person. As you read about Paul's story in Acts and in the letters that he wrote, you just get a sense of he's just kind of a normal guy, although very committed. And he mentions three things here. Holy, which I take to mean as he was dedicated to God, and he wanted to live in such a way that God was honored by the way he lived. Now, when I think of that as a man, I think about he was wise in how he related to the women folk. The second thing, he says righteous, and here I think that he wasn't cutting corners in his finances. And then blameless, I think about that. When I think about that, I think about our mouth. The things that we say or our lies or white lies or sarcasm or any of the kinds of things that can come out of our mouth. His character. The fourth thing is his care. We were gentle among you like a mother caring for her children. So here he mentions mother, and a little bit we're going to see he mentions the motif of father. He had a relationship with these folks where he cared about them. And he could write this to remind them because they sensed that from him. We were gentle among you like a mother caring for her little children. Now, when it comes to gaining a hearing with people, sometimes it's easy for Christians, for us, to think that I need to get this care and conduct and concern. I need to have this down cold, or else I'm not going to gain a hearing with people. Sometimes we think we just have to have this perfect, or we get all wigged out when we mess up with something, or we say something we shouldn't have done, or something we shouldn't have said, rather than just to go back and just freely acknowledge that what we did was wrong. And sometimes you have to ask forgiveness for what you said or what you did. It's not that we have to be perfect in order to gain a hearing. It's just that we have to be credible as a person. None of us is going to be perfect when it comes to living our life before other people. That's just a given. But we come to that place where you start to want to use words, and we want to start to share our faith, and how do we do that? And this is where I think we sometimes get the cart before the horse. Colossians 4:5 says, be wise in the way that you act toward outsiders, meaning folks outside of the faith. Make the most of every opportunity. And then look what he says in verse 6. Let your conversation, and here conversation means the manner of how you're conversing with somebody. But the manner, and it implies a back and forth. Let your conversation be always full of grace. He's talking about, again, what do you sense from this person? What do you sense? What attitude are you sensing from Paul? Full of grace, seasoned with salt. We would call this maybe being sensitive or thoughtful, so that you may know how to answer everyone, not just blurting out words that come to your mind, but we would call this just being a great friend to somebody, being a thoughtful friend. Our words, our attitude, and our tone. Verse 11, you know how that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children. Again, that's the motif. That's how he saw himself as he related to these lost people in the city of Thessalonica. He saw himself as sort of a father figure to many of them and wanted to relate to them like that. Not like projects. Encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Now, one of the things that I think is very easy for us to miss as we're talking with people is the importance of people's story. You have a story of your life. I have a story of my life. The lost people that you know have a story about their life. And that story is important for them to know your story, and it's important for you to know their story. Again, this is a relational process as you talk to people. We usually make a mistake when we try to take a huge leap straight to Jesus. Again, people really don't care what we know until they know that we care. And so when I think about this, I think about what Jesus said to the disciples when he sent them out on a mission trip, Matthew 10:16. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Now, what is he telling them here? He's saying you just can't walk out and just blurt out anything you want to say to people in the same way that a snake is shrewd. It doesn't just strike at any animal that passes by. Before it strikes, it takes a look at what it's about to strike and to eat. But there are some animals that a snake is going to hide from. In other words, even snakes understand you just can't naively just relate any way you want to or strike. You have to put your thinking cap on. You have to be wise in the way that you relate to people and not naive. The second, innocent as doves, meaning you can't be a threat. You can't come in and just with your big gospel rope and you're going to lasso somebody. He's talking about innocent as doves. They're about as helpless of birds as there is. When I think about this, I think about James 1:19. He says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And this is a really good motif to think about as you're relating to your lost friends or family members. Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to get angry. What this means is to ask questions and to take into account what people are saying to you and communicate that you care about what you hear. One of the best examples I know this is Jesus when he was about 12 years old. Joseph and Mary go into Jerusalem for the time of the festival. A big herd of people are there, big caravan of people, and they're there. And on the way back home, a big caravan is leaving, going back home and to Nazareth. And after 3 days, Mary, it sort of sounds like our home, the Gatchel home sometimes, where, I'm not the best communicator, Joseph goes to Mary, hey, have you seen Jesus? No, I thought it was with you. Oh, I thought it was with you. Now, they'd gone 3 days before they knew that Jesus was gone, which kind of gives me some comfort because sometimes it's only a day or two before we're not caught up on communication, which I take responsibility for. After 3 days, they find him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. He is 12 years old. And there he is with the theological elite, the PhDs of the time, in the temple, in a circle, and he's asking them questions and listening. But notice what the effect of this is. In verse 47, all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now, what happened? Because he started out by caring and listening and asking questions and probably follow-up questions, at some point, those guys did what most people do, is they reciprocate. They asked questions of him, and they listened. And what that did at that point was he created a platform on which he had a chance to share. But he didn't go in, even though he was the Son of God, didn't go in with all gospel guns blazing. He went in humbly, asked questions, was listening, thoughtful, and at some point they did what people do oftentimes, is to reciprocate by asking questions in return. When I think about this, I think about the power of story and relationship. I mentioned Paul a minute ago, and when we think about Paul in the book of Acts, Some of the times he went in to start a church in a city, and he went like Athens. He went into the big marketplace, and he preached what's called the Mars Hill Sermon. Very, very famous sermon. Or sometimes he'd go into debate some of the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders in a city. And those are the things that sort of grab our attention. But those are not the only methods he used in sharing his faith. When he went to Thessalonica, as we just read about in the last 15 minutes, it was a very relational approach. When he went to Philippi to start a church in that Greek city, it was also a very relational approach. And I think that that's the motif that you and I, for the most part, are going to need and going to use. Verse 8 of 2 Thessalonians 2 says, "We loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our own lives as well, because you had become so dear to us." A platform for listening was erected by Paul by his care and the sharing of his life, just being a humble person, just like the people that he wanted to talk to. And it opened doors for him to be able to share the gospel. Jesus said about himself, the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. In other words, he was on the move towards people relationally. When I think about this in my own life, a lot of you know I became a Christian my junior year in college. At the about January of my junior year, and when I started my junior year at Baylor, I had a roommate named Johnny, and for the life of me, I don't remember how we became roommates. And I don't remember how I even met him. But the two of us rented a small house just a couple blocks off the Baylor campus, a small wood frame house. It was probably 70 years old or so. And we were roommates. And I found out within a short amount of time that he was a Christian. And he liked to talk about Jesus, and he would share his faith story with me. And at that time in my life, I was a skeptic. And I typically made fun of Christians. So he would say something, and I would throw back some sarcasm at him, or joke with him, or make fun of him, or something like that. And to his credit, he didn't take any of that stuff personally. He just continued to be a friend to me. To September, October, November, December. And I remember, as I look back on those days, I must have been so annoying to be a roommate. Somebody like that. Just awful. I was the sarcasm king. And yet he continued to just be a friend to me and share his life as best he could. And I think what happened during those months is that God used his life to slowly soften a hard heart. There's something about him that just his care and his patience with me is almost like in the parable of the four soils, where the soil was getting softer. And it's almost like God was using Johnny to come and take some stones out of that ground and to clear out some weeds and thistles so that when the seed was planted, it would have a chance to germinate and grow. In December of that year, I started going to church for the first time, a Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church. And I remember kind of being somewhat skeptical. And I remember the first time I heard a sermon thinking, a Bible sermon, I thought, wow, there's some good stuff in that book. How did I miss this? Now, if I'd gone in September, I would have been much more skeptical. But his life, I think, slowly softened my heart and made it to where I was now interested and at least curious. About 6 weeks later, much to my surprise, I ended up becoming a Christian. And I look back on that time, and again, I've never, after the year ended, I never saw Johnny again. I have no idea where he is, what he's doing. And yet that young student's impact on my life, he probably has no idea that his life made a difference with me. Very small, day-by-day investments in me of care and concern and patience is what made a difference over the course of about 5 months. Let's pray together. Father, sometimes we get this thing about witnessing. We get this in our head as some big project that only the professionals can do and that we could never do. And yet, it's such a relational aspect. There's so many aspects of just friendship to it and just personal care and taking an interest in other people people are hungry for genuine care and somebody that really concerned about me and wants to listen to my story and listen to my joys and listens to my heartaches, listens to the rough patches of my growing up years or my current years. Would you help us to see people the way you see them? Would you allow us to have the love of Jesus for the people that you've placed around us? And help us to enter with wisdom and care into their lives with the story of our lives and the story of the gospel.